Well, calls are getting louder for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation centres to be shut down. They come as another 29 Palestinians were killed at the sites on Wednesday while seeking food. More than 640 people have been killed since the GHF began operating 5 weeks ago. The Swiss government has initiated proceedings to dissolve the Geneva branch of the GHF, citing legal shortcomings. Well, more than 200 non-governmental organisations have issued a joint statement urging GHF be disbanded. They say 400 aid distribution points operating during the temporary ceasefire have been replaced with just 4 militarised zones where Palestinians face daily fire and mass casualties while trying to get food. The NGOs call on countries to take measures to end the siege on Gaza and uphold the right of civilians to safely receive aid and protection. And they support the restoration of a unified UN-led coordination mechanism grounded in international humanitarian law. Well, the UN Secretary-General's office says the organisation is willing to work with anyone to ensure aid gets to Palestinians.
We are not asking, nor do we have a monopoly on humanitarian aid distribution in Gaza. There is enough work for everyone. Other international NGOs, member states, all that we ask is that people operate with the minimum standards that are globally accepted on humanitarian aid: impartiality, independence, that operate in a way that doesn't put the recipients at risk of being shot at, right? That doesn't put aid workers at greater risk. We are willing to work with anyone, and we have worked with many different partners. All that we're asking is for them to meet a minimum standard.
Well, let's bring in Hardin. He's Vice President for Programs and Policy at Refugees International. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Hardin, so this AP report just reinforces the evidence that these GHF food distribution points are simply death traps for the thousands of Palestinians desperately seeking food in Gaza. Why has the delivery of aid been militarised, do you think? And what impact is this having on a population that continues to be bombed, shot and starved to death?
It's a very good question as to why this is the solution, right, that's being put on the table to solve what in essence is a man-made mass starvation situation. And we're encountering the situation in Gaza has been amongst the worst in the last 2.5 years that we've faced globally. And over the last couple of months, due to a closure of the border and a sealing of Gaza and blocking of humanitarian assistance, we're now at probably the worst humanitarian situation that we've seen in the Strip. And what's been sent in to solve the problem is a militarized solution. And there's just no fathomable way in which the model that's currently on the ground is going to respond or avert famine in its current operational model. So the question is, why is this being done? We're being told by the Israelis, for example, and the Americans, that one of the key objectives of this is to stop the diversion of aid to Hamas. But I mean, the fundamental question here is no evidence of that diversion has yet been provided. I mean, humanitarian organizations and agencies are standing by to work with the Israelis and the Americans to understand what is the nature of the problem so that it can be fixed if indeed it does exist. Okay. And American officials, going back to
Yeah, let me just jump in there a sec, Hardin, because the GHF hubs, we know, have replaced over 400 existing UN and NGO distribution points all over the Gaza Strip. And the locations of the hubs forces people to travel long distances to get food. Doesn't that effectively allow the Israeli military to forcibly displace Palestinians under the guise of getting food, which is illegal anyway under international law?
So if your goal was to prevent famine or to feed a population or to provide humanitarian assistance at any sort of basic level, you would be using the model of having these 400 distribution sites, which has proven during ceasefires able to avert the worst in Gaza. By creating 3 to 4 distribution sites in an area where the military objective is to push the population towards those zones, it quite clearly appears that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is designed to further a military objective as opposed to meet a humanitarian one. And frankly, anything that's leading to or a device that's furthering forced displacement is a violation of international law.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we know that the GHF has never been tested under operational conditions. So it was highly unlikely that they were ever going to be able to gain international support to scale up operations in time to prevent famine, which you just talked about. How much is the entire Gaza population now at risk of famine, given that lack of capacity and operational viability of the GHF?
Sure. I mean, this was one of the big questions. Like, why would you put an unproven model on the ground using highly dubious methods of operation? I mean, honestly, like if your model is one, your business model is one that requires you to use force against the population or for the occupational authority to use force around you towards the Palestinians, killing potentially hundreds of Palestinians in the process, that business model isn't fit for purpose. So I think the issue now is those hubs are, if they were operating at maximum capacity, if they were operating the way in theory they should, they could play an important part in diverting or averting famine in certain parts of the strip. However, like the food aid is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a shelter issue. There's a healthcare issue. You have thousands, tens of thousands of children who are acutely malnourished. They don't need the food in those boxes. What they need are very specific interventions that require a medical presence to administer. And the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation simply isn't designed to mount that kind of operation.
Hardin, just a final thought to you. I mean, it's interesting because over 600 Palestinians we know have been killed at these GHF food sites. And now, as we've been saying here, over 200 NGOs have called for them to be shut down. How do you think all of this is likely to play out if there is a ceasefire deal? Because it doesn't seem likely that the UN will be allowed back into Gaza anytime soon to drastically improve the humanitarian situation.
Well, I mean, that's the key piece of the puzzle here. Like, if we are relying on this system moving forward, it is very hard to see how we're going to see a major improvement in the humanitarian situation. Even if we do get a ceasefire, what we need once there is a ceasefire is to allow the UN and the aid agencies to go back in and to turn on their aid programs. And this can be additive. You can allow the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, as long as it stops killing Palestinians, to continue to operate. And you can allow, as long as the UN is allowed to do its business. Like the model and the type of assistance that they're offering, even if it was working the way it's supposed to work, would fall far short of what is necessary to avert the worst.
Hardin Lang, good to get your thoughts and your analysis, Hardin. Many thanks for talking to Al Jazeera. Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.